Diana Tang, and it is my pleasure today to introduce to you Grigory Kalinovsky. Grigory Kalinovsky taught at Manhattan School of Music and is currently a professor of violin at Indiana University Jacobs School of Music. He is a devoted educator who is also continuing to teach at Pinchas Zuckerman Young Artists Program in Canada and the Heifetz International Music Institute. Professor Kalinovsky also has a new CD of sonatas for violin and piano by Mieczysław Weinberg, a close friend and protege of Shostakovich, which is already out on Naxos this month and should be on CD next Friday.
It's this Friday actually. It's
yeah,
already
this
streaming.
Friday.
It should be.
Yeah. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Professor Kalinovsky.
Thank you for coming. So the title, Taming Tension, it's catchy title as far as titles go, but it has a very active kind of upbeat feel to it. But in reality, I think it's a very slow, very thoughtful, and lifelong process that has to do more with building self-awareness and muscle separations than has to do with taming anything. And I don't presume to have all the answers. I'm sure there are colleagues out there who do it better than me. But this has been at the kind of forefront of my teaching approach for over 20 years. And I thought, if nothing else, putting together this presentation will help me further organize my thoughts and improve my own teaching. There are two main reasons why this has been so important in my teaching. One is that my technique was completely deconstructed and rebuilt by Pinchas Zuckerman and Buddy Kopeck when I was 19. And having gone through this process at a relatively self-conscious age, I think it keeps, has kept it in kind of in a more conscious state in my mind. I kind of cerebrally know what I'm doing, and which helps me pass it on to my students. And the second reason is that as long as I remember myself teaching, I've always had this ability of looking at somebody play, and I can tell what their muscles are feeling, even when the back of their legs get tight. And it's not something, it's just something that I have. There's no merit to it, and it wasn't brought with experience. It's just something that I've always had as far as I can remember. And so for me, working through it has become very important. I also get pain all over my body by the end of the day because I'm kind of incorporating everybody's tensions. But it definitely helps me figure out what people are doing wrong. Before I go into actual process of how I go through taming tension, I'd like to digress a little bit and explain something that I actually learned recently that I knew intuitively for many years, but was interesting to find out in a more scientific way. One of the biggest problems in playing in general, but especially in conquering tension, is conquering our ever-present autopilot. I'm sure all of you have taught students have had to say at some point in these words or some, or other ones, don't play on autopilot. Be conscious of what you're doing. I am actually co-teaching a course with my wife, who is a neuroscientist. We offer a seminar course at Indiana University. It's called Neuroscience of Music Perception. And so while reading through scientific literature, I stumbled upon a very interesting paper actually back from 1983 by Lipet in the Brain magazine. And there are two main points that I got out of it that, they don't really help with anything except they kind of justify my thinking. I've always known, I'm sure all of you know that, it's kind of common science knowledge that the intent to act can be recorded from motor cortex in the brain sometimes as far as a second and a half before you actually produce the action. What I didn't know, what I learned from that paper, There are two things that are absolutely fascinating. One is that the signal in premotor cortex, which sends the signal to motor cortex to start the motion sequence, happens even earlier and before we are consciously aware of wanting to initiate an action. Now, to me, that's incredibly fascinating. In other words, when we think that things are under our conscious control, that's an illusion. We act upon kind of recorded tapes of motor sequences that are in our subconscious. And our control is actually not in so much in deciding what we want to do, but in not letting those automatic motions, like letting some happen and stopping others. And I was interrupting that subconscious circuit. And people with some neurological disorders like Tourette syndrome, they can produce very complex motor patterns without being aware that they're doing it. In other words, they do not have that mental ability to stop the circuit, to interrupt it. And so it explains why it's so difficult and why it's so necessary to practice in a self-aware and slow mode, because first we have to interrupt the autopilot, and then we have to initiate a conscious motion. And that's why it takes so much mental effort. And I've had, when I used to teach more pre-college kids, I've had kids in age 11 to 13, sometimes faint in the first lessons. Actually, I've had it several times. Had it happen when the amount of focus that I demanded actually made them faint. And so that's one thing. And the other one that I learned also from that paper is that the feedback that we feel from the action that we produce, we actually register it before we start the action. In other words, we have a mental representation of what the feedback, how we expect the feedback to feel. And so what we react to is that mental representation, not the actual physical result of our action. Right? Yes?
Can you speak up?
Is it still too soft?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
There's no microphones?
There is. Okay. Should I use a mic?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Should I go back to anything or? No. Was everything okay so far, though? Okay. So. So the only time we actually register the real feedback is if the discrepancy between what we expect and what actually happened is large enough to initiate an error message. If the actual feedback is not different enough from the expected one, what we perceive is actually in our imagination. Which is why it's so difficult to practice consciously, to practice self-aware, because biologically we are not primed for it. Right? And so I've always told my students, and now I know why I told them, that when you practice intonation, the only effective way of doing it is to suspect that every note is wrong. Because if it's just a little bit out of tune, you're not going to react to it. And so that for me is one of the reasons why taming tension, which is a natural process, is so difficult. So now on to the actual. That was a digression that I put in before after I actually put together the presentations. So now back to it. So the reason tension is so difficult to conquer is because tension is natural. It's our natural reaction to practically every aspect of violin playing or viola playing or any other playing, actually. Violin and viola probably more so because the posture is just so uncomfortable. Practically everything that has to do with playing is conducive to tension. Emotional stress, right? Wanting to express something in the music, stress of being on stage, technical difficulty, wanting to do well, right? And just the fact that we are not built to play a violin. Even the posture itself is completely asymmetrical, right? So that's why playing with minimal tension is not something that you just learn and then it stays with you. It's really a full-time job. And if you watch videos of any great players, especially those that play ergonomically beautifully, because there are certainly some great players that do play with tension and work through it, but I'm talking
people like Oistrakh or Zuckerman or people or Gilshaham, people who have complete freedom in their body. If you watch really carefully, you can see them releasing tension. Even people with, seemingly zero body language, right? You look at Oistrakh, there's almost no movement. But if you look really closely, just besides the famous head move, he every few seconds he goes and releases tension. And you can see it with everyone that I've watched, all of the great players. There's always a process of releasing tension. So I have kind of for myself divided that process of working through tension into two categories: ergonomically efficient technique and learning to separate emotional intensity from physical tension. So I'll try to go through basically, the longest part will be I'll just demonstrate what I take my new students through in a very kind of short Reader Digest version. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the actual, learning to phrase without tension. And hopefully there'll be a little time left for questions afterwards. I'm sorry, I will have to put the microphone down because I only have 2 hands, not 3. So, so we start with, can you hear me this way?
Yes.
I mean, my father was an opera singer, so I hope I can carry it. So we start with posture. As I said, posture in the violin is unnatural. Right? So we try to make it as natural as possible. One thing that I found is absolutely crucial is that the center of gravity is in front of the body. Right? Because our natural instinct, especially when we are nervous, is to stand like this. Right? And so what happens the moment you do that, even if everything else works correctly, what I usually demonstrate to my students right away is I'll play an open D string, and I'll play it this way, standing straight up, and then I'll go in front. It's a completely different sound. It kind of opens up a third dimension. So I call it gorilla posture. So you keep your back straight, but shoulders like a gorilla. And so that's what I usually say. So the difference between the good posture that your mother taught you and violin posture is the shoulders. The back is still straight, but your shoulders are kind of stooped forward. Or we would also call it the macho posture. If you watch any of the kind of great actors who are kind of macho figures, right? It's always shoulders are here, right? The other important thing is in terms of holding the instrument as a sensation for me. That's very important. Actually, I think works for cellists too, because it's all the same thing, except you don't have to hold the cello over here. Is the sensation of having a long neck, but short throat. In other words, not this, but this. Sometimes I also say, imagine that you are singing the lowest note you can. So you push your throat down as low as it can go. And it also, besides overall tension, it also actually makes the sound darker. I don't know why. But when you go up the E string, I found if you go, if I go inside, the sound becomes much darker instead of this. So I always try to feel, Adam's apple down for girls who don't have Adam's apple, but it's the same sensation that you push your throat down. So it's long neck and short throat. So the other sensation, it all kind of goes into basically how you hold the violin. And there I think I have to take my jacket off because otherwise you won't see. So what's very important for me, the sensation, is that when you lift your arms, the weight of the arms pushes the collarbones down. So that's, contributes to that sensation of having a long neck. So what happens when you lift your left arm is that you feel the weight of it pushing the collarbone down, but then the deltoid muscles actually create an upward slant. So you have an automatic shelf for the instrument. So instead of doing this, actually the sensation, instead of raising the shoulder, you're actually lowering it. And so then the violin simply goes right into it. And
it's completely free. The other, so the concept for me when I take people's shoulder rests off, and I'm a big believer in taking people's shoulder rests off, is that instead of moving the shoulder up, you move it forward. So that still shortens this distance, but it doesn't tense up neck muscles. And it may feel a little bit unnatural at first, but it does not create tension. You can feel a little stretch if you're not used to it, but there's no tension. Some imagery, I call it fencing shoulder, because if you're fencing, so shoulder is right there. So I have basically built in a motion that when I pick up the violin, the shoulder goes forward to meet it, rather than this. Then something actually that came from buried childhood memories. My first teacher always said that the violin comes down from space. So the violin always comes from above. Because it's like 9 times out of 10, you see a kid pick up the violin, they go like this. Right? So when you do that, by the time the violin is up, you're already off balance. So I actually think that the Suzuki method of putting the violin up is absolutely brilliant. That in New York they call it stop, turn, bend, right? Because what happens when you do this and then you turn the violin is exactly that. The shoulder goes forward, the collarbone goes down, and you simply throw the violin in. So of course, college students don't want to go on stage and do stop, turn, bend. So what I teach them to do is always lift the violin above your head first, in a position in which all you have to do is simply rotate your wrist and the violin is in place. So if you feel like you need to get the head out of the way, that's already wrong. So you lift your arm, turn the violin towards you, swing it in, put it on, drop your shoulder. And I make them practice that over and over so that the violin goes in, you can immediately drop the arm and feel completely free. So you don't need to fiddle with it, right? Another very important concept for me is that the shoulders are heavy, but the arm is light. And this actually comes from Zachar Braun, who always said that the left hand should be light and active. So left hand, because 99% of all posture problems actually have nothing to do with how you hold the violin here. Everybody's left arm gets tired and starts hanging down, right? And then the instrument starts being pulled out, so you grip it, and it's a vicious circle. So for me, the very important sensation is that the arm is actually, it feels as if it's next to the violin. It can also support the violin, but it should never hang on the violin. So the violin, sometimes I say, imagine you have balloons attached to your arm, and it's just hovering. So the violin should never feel like you have to hold it, hold it with effort. It's actually quite light. Viola is a little bit more difficult. The violin is quite light, and it shouldn't. And what I usually tell students is that most people have enough brains in their head to provide the weight necessary to support the instrument. Just relax your head, and that's it. And the arm is always, always, always light. So just a couple of words about why I don't like shoulder rests. I wasn't given much of a choice when my first lesson with Tinka Zuckerman, my shoulder rest went out the window. The main disadvantage is that it creates a scaffolding. Because free playing is all about free movement, right? And it's very hard to move freely around a fixed object, right? So if your violin is attached to you, like when you break your arm, they put those like a stick made of
cast.
Yeah, but also there was also a stick here. So that's how the violin feels with a lot of shoulders, especially those huge ones that are curved. And so the violin is no longer part of your body, and you can no longer work around it. The other reason is that the violin should be close to your shoulder, not close to your chin, right? Because if the violin is too far above the shoulder, then the bow arm feels unbalanced. It has to reach up, right? If the violin is on the shoulder, then everything here is centered. So for those of us with long necks, and my neck is pretty long, I build up chin rests. So it's always to fill up the space upstairs than downstairs. And in terms of what I use, if people are interested, what I use for setup, I am not a completely hardcore person, with a collarbone and left hand. I can do it in the practice room. I don't risk doing it on stage. Jonathan Schwartz did a brilliant demonstration, I think, here last year, and also at IU, how he learned in his mid-40s to play the old way, just collarbone and left hand. I am not quite that far gone. I do use the shoulder, but what I either don't use anything, especially with a jacket, or if I'm tired, my back hurts sometimes, I'll use just this. And for guys, you put it under the short. For girls, you put it in the violin. It's just soft. This is what you get in Bed Bath & Beyond for under carpets. And the advantage is you roll it whichever way you need. For some shoulders you want it wider, for some shoulders you want it taller. And then on the violin, I just have a little piece so it doesn't slide. So I can play without it easily. Sometimes I put this under my shirt. That's it. And I found that this setup with a proper chin rest works for about 99% of people. What I mean by proper chin rest, again, I firmly believe in this one, Guarneri chin rest. Guarneri model. I don't believe in shaped chin rests because to me a shaped chin rest, if it doesn't fit your chin, then what? So just like it's again, a shaped chin rest makes you stuck in one position, right? Because it holds. So it's the same problem as the shoulder rest. But the reason I like Guarneri model chin rest is because they're practically flat. And so you got equal support this way, that way, doesn't matter. I always order the same one because actually what I found out a couple of years ago is that just because they are called Guarneri chin rests, they are not always made by the same company. And some companies actually shape them more than others. So I always have the same link from Shark catalog that I order this from, usually 5 or 10 at a time. And I always get ones with the heel clamps, with the straight ones. Because the regular U clamp, it bends after a while, and so the chin rest starts leaking up, and that starts pushing until you immediately get neck tension. So my kind of religious chin rest is the Guarneri model heel clamps, and then you see it's like it's raised with cork. It's just painted black, so it wouldn't look ugly, but it's just a few layers of cork. So that's as far as posture goes. Now onto the bow hand. So first thing that I always say to students is that semantics are important. And the name bow grip is a very bad term, right? Because you don't grip the bow, you balance it. You really balance the bow like a juggler. And so the first exercise that I do with all the students is learning to balance the bow between these two fingers. So you have a ring between thumb and middle finger, kind of a mental connection, right? So I always feel the corner of the thumb touching the middle of that first line on the middle finger. And it's always hanging, and so you start over here. Just take the bow, go above the middle of the bow so you don't have to worry about the tip going down, and just put it in, and make sure that you're completely loose. The tiniest tug on the bow and the bow slips through. That's really just the friction with the skin that's holding the bow. You can swing it around, and you're not afraid. If you have a carbon fiber bow, it's a good place to start. Or you do it, you do it in your room or above your bed, so you're not afraid to drop the bow, and actually drop it a few times so that you feel where the threshold is, right? Because really, just the remnants of rosin on the stick are enough to, to attach the bow to the finger. And so and do it over and over. Every time it just goes, and you're immediately loose. And when you can do that 20 times out of 20 and it feels good, then you start working up the bow. And so the final goal is to be able to do it at the frog and balance the bow like a juggler. You know how people balance sticks on one finger? So that's how I feel. I'm not holding, I'm just kind of following the tip. And it's completely loose. So the second exercise I go through is up and down, which I'm sure many people have seen. The particular reason why I use it is to teach separation between pinky and index. Because our reflex, of course, is to bend all fingers together. And what it does immediately, when the pinky gets strong, if the index gets strong with it, you immediately get choked sound. There's no way around it. It's an immediate reaction. If you curve the thumb, if you curve the index with the pinky, you get this as opposed to that. And I always find this one of the hardest things to learn, to separate index from pinky. So I start with this exercise. What I always tell the students is the moment the pinky starts bending, the index becomes inert. And so up, you control the motion. Down, you simply drop. So you go up and down. until it's zero effort, mental or physical, right? Because of course in the beginning it all goes like this, and so it's only. And what's also very important is that the pinky bends from the base knuckle, so it doesn't bend inwards. It bends, if the bow was horizontal, it bends straight up, so that the nail is always perpendicular to the stick. And then comes a much harder exercise, which I have to give a disclaimer. When I showed it to Zuckerman, he couldn't do it, and he has the best bow in the world, so there. But I think it's important. So that one is learning to balance the bow just on the pinky, without tensing the wrist and without tensing the index finger. So the way I do. So there are two issues here. One is building strength in the pinky, but more important issue is building, again, muscle separation. And so, like with any complex mathematical problem, you take it apart. You take the strength out of the equation. You start closer to the balance point. So what I usually do is I have the students kind of feel that the bow is hanging on the middle finger. We define the balance point, and the wrist is completely relaxed. Never play like this, but for this exercise, the wrist is high, just to separate the muscles. And then you go just 1/4 of an inch towards the frog, so the bow just starts falling. Index finger is off, ring finger is off, pinky is on the inside of the bow a little bit, and you bend the pinky, straighten the pinky. So windshield wiper, seesaw, whatever you want to call it. And the beginning sometimes helps to take the other hand, put the thumb under the wrist to keep it loose, and to push with the middle finger, push the pinky knuckle down. So you really isolate the pinky, so you learn to feel just that one motion. When you can do this in your sleep, you go another 1/4 of an inch over a couple of weeks, should be able to get to the frog and do it well. So that's one way. The other way I've also sometimes tried, instead of starting in the middle of the bow, starting vertically, letting the bow fall, first just a few degrees, then a little bit more, so the bow falls away from the index finger. And of course, with every single student, they say they understand, they come back the next day and they do this. So it's not about arm motion, it's not about wrist motion, it's only the pinky. And what I always tell the students, if you can do that, you have complete control of the frog. Any kind of landing, any kind of attack, any kind of court. Also a very important thing that I actually came to later, just a few years ago, watching the old generation Russian school. And I mean Russian, I mean Soviet school, I don't mean Heifetz. Actually I came to that exercise watching Michael Hopperman play. And that's learning to completely disengage fingertips. So one of the problems that I find with a lot of students is that the arm gets tense towards the tip because they try to stretch the arm while gripping the bow with the fingertips. Right, so you do that, and I feel tendonitis coming on just thinking about it. And so what I teach them to do is to be able to play at the tip with fingers completely open and completely loose. And so one of the exercises that I do, depending on how self-aware a student is at that point, ideally what I have them do, should I get up on a chair? Yeah. Yes? Okay. I don't know if I can balance. I don't know if I can balance on one chair. Okay. Here we go. Can everybody see me now? All right. So what I have them do is learn to play détaché in the upper half, with the bow basically just lying on the thumb and the middle finger simply touching open on top of the bow. And if you do it properly, if everything is loose and you know how to control bow direction with the large muscles, with upper arm and elbow, you should be able to get a good sound with zero pressure. Completely free. And so I have them practice this until they lose all fear. They lose the fear of dropping the bow. Because really the bow is lying on the string and on the thumb. And you just need the middle finger so it doesn't roll off the thumb. And that's it. Because the difference between this and if you tighten the fingertip even a little bit, see the sound is immediately choked. This way, no matter how much pressure you put later, the sound is open. And what I always explain is that the reason different bows sound different on the same instrument, I feel silly, is that bow has its own vibration. The stick has its own vibration. And that vibration combines with the vibration of the string and produces different color, and which is why I hate carbon fiber bows, because they don't have that natural vibration. And vertical pressure, when done correctly, it does not interfere with the vibration. So if your pressure is only vertical, the sound is free. The moment you grip the bow sideways and you choke the vibration of the string, the sound becomes dead. And so for me, that ability to completely, actually the word inert in my teaching is probably what the words I use the most. Learning to keep certain muscles inert. And so for me, inert fingertips in the bow hold is an incredibly important subject. So what I have them practice is with just the middle finger, then just the index finger, and then you put two together and nothing. And I always tell them to put a hand on my shoulder and feel how my shoulder feels, and that there is no difference when I play pianissimo or fortissimo. Because the only difference is how much pressure I put on the index, and everything else is just as loose. So the other important thing for me in the upper half is learning to put the pressure only, to keep tension only between the thumb and the index when needed. So when you need pressure, it comes only from that kind of scissors motion, when the thumb is pushing up and the index is pushing down. And everything else stays completely loose. So, and even the tip of the index stays loose. Because again, if I press down, even a lot, all the way through the hair, right? If I press down and my index is open, sound is still free. The moment the index curves, sound is choked. And so that's another exercise that I always do with new students, is basically just learning to squeeze, building up this muscle. Learning to squeeze between the thumb and the index without tensing up anything else. So just to press, hold for a few seconds, do a little collar motion, relax, press for a few seconds. Right? And so that's kind of the basics of bow hold. Oh, that's so much better. Now on to larger motions. So for me, the key in sound production is what I call the right shoulder magic, is that the arm is completely separated from the shoulder joint. When I play, I actually feel the bone, the upper arm bone, literally pull out of the shoulder socket, almost dislocate. And I got it from watching cellists. When they play down bow, you always see this pull out. And I think the same thing on the violin, because the moment you do that, the sound opens up. And so whenever I start any motion, up or down, the first thing I feel is the arm falling away from the body. So imagery that I sometimes use is, imagine that you're an old rag doll and the arm is almost torn off and just hanging by one thread, right? Or somebody took a picture of you on the phone and went on the computer, Photoshop, cut the arm off and moved it forward a little bit. So it's kind of swinging in front of your body. And so there are a couple of exercises that I do to create the correct muscle sensation. What I find is that the biggest problem that we all have is with the lateral deltoid muscle. So deltoid muscles support the arm. We have three. We have front, middle, and back. I think the back is called lateral. The problem with that back deltoid muscle is that we rarely use it in regular life. Right? If you roll, you might use it, but in normal everyday motions, you don't really need it. But I think it's the most crucial muscle for bow arm control, because its job is to support the weight of the arm while horizontally leaving it completely free. And the first test that I do with all new students is ask them to hold the arm at 90 degrees with the forearm pointing down, and without raising the shoulder, raise the elbow as high as you can, actually feeling the shoulder go down and down to your stomach. But always keeping this angle. The reason is if you do this, you're working with the front deltoid. That's easy. The only way to activate the back one is to twist the arm that way. And usually when I start with students, I hear cracking and the shoulder trembles, especially on the way down. And so I tell them, you do this until you can fly, or until you lose that tremble. So when this becomes effortless, then you've got that muscle. So basically the 4 core exercises I do for this is this one. Second one is simply starting to swing the arm completely freely down here, and really like totally free. The wrist is free, just like a monkey from a tree. And then when you find that motion, you start raising the level. So A string level, D string level, G string level. And the goal is that at G string level, it feels just as effortless as down here. It really should not feel any different. Then you have complete freedom in sound production, and you can do as opposed to that. So what I after going so sorry so those 2 exercises, 2 more, and I'm pushing it all together. In reality, some of them I do after I do other stuff, because depending on how much I have to rebuild technique. A lot of light lower half détaché. So light, so that you don't use the string for support. You actually have to use your deltoids. And large, easy détaché. Only feeling this swing. With completely inactive fingers. And so I usually tell my students the goal is to be able to play through don't number 2 from beginning to the end and the arm not falling off. And so you go. And so forth. And the last exercise, this is really torturous, is to play slow, very slow détaché at the very tip of the bow on a G string. And to go. No pressure here. It's like you are carrying something dirty, dirty diapers. So you only feel that muscle supporting the arm. And so when I actually start working on sound production, the first thing I do is down bow swings. So we start with just doing this. Just hold the arm, drop it completely loose. After that, you do the same thing, but instead of dropping down, you throw it forward. Kind of like that famous ancient Greek statue, the disc thrower. And you just go that way, so the arm like flies away from your body. And then what I say is that this motion is basically your down bow. The sensation should be that the only thing slowing it down is the resistance of the string. If the string wasn't there, the arm would simply fall through. So you do that, we swing the arm, and then do one down bow. Until I'm satisfied I'm getting completely free ringing sound. Right? So when that's getting better, then we graduate to the up bows. Now, for me, one of the most crucial aspects of starting an up bow is that up bow is actually the downward motion. I've had this argument even with my own teachers. Every summer we teach together at Zuckerman's program in Ottawa. We often change people's technique, and she always says, "Why do you have them do this?" Because I find so. What I have them do is the moment the up bow starts, the first thing that happens is the elbow falls down, and of course you never play like this. But I find this to be absolutely essential sensation for correct up bow. So for the first 2-3 weeks, I teach them to do this. So the moment you start the up bow, you completely release the shoulder, even to the point of dropping the body. Just complete. Because what I find is sometimes, I would get, not in the last 10 years, but before when I was less sure of myself, I would, start doubting, and I would start doing students without that exercise. And invariably, I found that their shoulder never gets relaxed. Because what happens is they go like this. And so I tell them in the beginning that you're going to do this religiously for 3 weeks, and then you'll forget about it. But every time, every up bow, basically up bow is the release, because you're supporting your arm, and then when you start your up bow, you drop. And so gradually, from actual physical motion, it becomes simply a sensation inside the shoulder. So I still do it, only you don't see it. It's inside the shoulder. So I just feel a release inside the shoulder. And so we do up bows. Then I usually do up, down and up, like a boomerang, so it becomes one motion. And finally, full bow. Okay, I should start compressing things. The other crucial thing for me in the shoulder motion is the famous Galamian in and out rotation. So down bow is forward, in the upper half, up bow is back. Again, for somebody who's never done it, I find it's one of the hardest concepts to teach is that the up bow is actually this way. And so what I do usually with students is we start without the bow. So that when you start down bow, the arm falls that way. Then for half a bow, then it falls that way. Then it falls back, and then it goes forward. And so out of those 4 motions, 3 are passive. It's a fall, it's a fall, it's a fall, and a throw. So you work with gravity as much as possible. And so I have them do this until it becomes effortless and automatic. So fall, 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 throw. Fall, 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 throw.
Can you do that slower one more time?
So it's when you start down bow from the frog, the upper arm moves back a little bit. So of course, without the bow, it's exaggerated by 1,000 times. But it falls this way. Then it falls forward for the upper half, to the tip. Then it falls back for the upper half, and you throw it forward for the lower half. So not up, but forward, as if you're trying to scratch your back. And so one of the most important exercises for me is whole bow, half half, which for me is that learning that effortless swing. So you go. No tension in the ball grip, and it's just back, forward, 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 back, forward. So it's all about circular motion. And you take Kreutzer number 2 for more advanced students. I like to do Don't number 2. Just go. I just like this better because better music. It's like waving a flag. It just goes effortlessly. And the half bows are always a little bit bigger than half. So it's not mathematical, it's really a circular sensation. One last thing about the bow. I mean, of course, it's by far not the last thing that I do, but just in terms of general tension. This is something that I adopted actually from Nivitz Weig. Stop bows. I do them a little bit differently. Maybe a little bit for a different reason, but I love the exercise and I kind of adopted it for my own teaching. And so, first of all, to feel the same weight and the same sound production, the same bite and the same stop in any part of the bow. So I usually start with whole bow down. I usually could do it on a D string because it sounds nicer on most violins and it's more horizontal position and the string has a better give. So it's a full bow down bow and then 2 ups. And the goal is to have exactly the same sensation in all parts of the bow. Same friction, same sizzle in the sound, and the same depth of bite. Then you do 2 downs, 1 up. I think are also crucial to start building self-awareness, because what I always say is, as long as your arm wants to move, you don't move. And so when you stop until your muscles are completely quiet, then you do the next. So as long as there is that autopilot wanting you to move forward, you don't move. And that's how I taught myself back when I was 19 to turn off the autopilot, basically on marteless strokes. That's what Zuckerman told Kreutzer 7. I would go, and I would stand there forever until I felt complete calm. And then I would play the next note. And the beginning was very frustrating because muscles don't want to stop. But I think it's a crucial step. So now, just quickly through some of the left-hand stuff that I like to do. A lot of tension stems from connecting wrist muscles with the fingers. So a lot of people help the fingers by pushing from the wrist. And I think it's one of the most detrimental things that you can do to your left hand. And so I teach kind of a more Russian approach. I call it the beggar hand. Go with this, give me money. And so that when you collapse the wrist this way slightly, it separates the wrist muscles from the fingers, and then the fingers can work separately. So the moment you do this, everything tenses up. And so I have a series of exercises I do with all students of what I call floppy articulation. So that the articulation comes, again, something I actually learned from cellists. They flop the fingers, they don't bang them, right? And to flop the fingers, so you start. So I usually start 60 to a bow, 4 beats. First with second finger, you go 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and, for me that and is very important, that pickup motion. And, which is very fast but light, like an electric shock. And so the actual articulation is simply the momentum of the finger. It has nothing to do with strength. And the finger is so fast that you barely hear the note, you hear a knock. And you do it with every finger. When you can do that, then you do it twice to a bow. 3 and the 4, 1 and the 2, 3 and the 4. And you do it with every finger. And then you do it every beat. 1 and the 2, and 3 and 4, 1 and 2, and 3 and 4. So after that's mastered with every finger, we move on to more muscle separation. So we keep first finger down. We go 1 and 2, 4. 1, 2, and 3, 4. So the first finger is very light, barely, almost harmonic. Do every finger, 1 time to a bow, twice to a bow, 4 times to a bow. What I find very important when you start doing it every beat is that the rebound from the string and the pre-bound, the preparation for the next note, are completely separated. So it's 1 and the 2 and the 3. And so it first relaxes, then it pulls back. Next step is keeping the finger down. It's the same thing. It's the same rebound, only you don't rebound all the way from the string. You go, you release it almost to a harmonic, completely relaxed. And then every beat. Again, the pickup and the next note are separated. And then you do shradik. Quarter notes, 8 notes. So it's impulses rather than strength. And if you do it properly, even at very high speed, you hear even articulation going up and down and no effort.
It's like shredding without tension.
Yes. Shradik, and then sometimes I also, depending on the student, and for certain speed, I switch to Shevchik. I like the ones where he goes in triplets. I started doing that after I saw my son, who is a cello student of Susan Moses, after I saw her explain low positions, middle positions, high positions, right? In cello you have a middle position, you have a low position, you have a high position. And why not us? Like, are we any worse? You know, first position is actually quite a stretch for a lot of people. So I actually realized that there is no fixed first position. You have a low position, middle position, and high position. And there's a slight tilt in the arm. And if you don't squeeze the neck, it's actually very easy to do. And I find that those Shevchik exercises are a perfect way to learn that shifting between low position and high. We start in low position, high position. Instead of reaching this way. Right? I find Shevchik is better when you start actually already building speed. Shevchik is better than shradik, in my opinion. Now, so this beggar hand also for me translated with the concept I came to already more recently, actually changed my left hand. Rebuilt my left hand almost completely in the last couple of years after spending a few weeks with Ilya Koller at Heifetz Institute. who has the most classic Russian hand. You know, it's like a pleasure to watch. Where the wrist is completely relaxed and you practically never feel fingers reach for anything. It's like the job of the arm is to supply the position for the fingers where they just go down almost inert. And so that's what I teach now and what I try to do in my own playing, especially when you do double stops are chords. So chords become basically shapes. You just fold the hand in different shapes. Rather than, let's say, looking for notes, you just feel shapes. This shape, this shape. Like every chord becomes a shape. And so I try to think of chords now and double stop as basically a unit. It's just the shape of the hand. This also translates for me into shifting. I realized that I was lied to all my life, because I was always told that when you learn shifting, you memorize the distance. And what I realized is that's wrong. Shifting for me now is basically a complete reset of the hand. So you memorize fingerboard and absolute coordinates. You know where the notes are. And the point of the shift is to erase the sensation of the old position from your arm and bring it to the new. And so, and position is not, by position for me now, what position means is not first, third, second, it's a second, third, fourth position. It's a position of the hand that allows whatever finger I'm shifting to be in the most relaxed state. So if you are, let's say if I'm shifting to G sharp, I'm not looking for guide notes anymore. I'm looking for G sharp. So I practice all my shifts now through open strings. And again, it's something actually that I heard Jonathan Schwartz say in the lecture. He used it for a different reason, but in my head it translates into this. So I do practice all shifts through open string, and the point is to completely reset the hand. So you totally reset it, and then you, in that relaxed state, you just bring it to the right place. So if I'm relaxed, my first finger is like in the middle of nowhere. If I actually try to go to the E, it tenses up the hand. So I practice every shift, and once I realized it, and I was actually playing, I had to play Strauss Sonata, which I play in my sleep. I've played it for 20 years. I re-practiced every single shift. Starting second movement, I practiced. And then the actual slide, the sensation becomes, it's exactly the same as doing open string, only you forget to lift the finger. You just leave it completely. And then it doesn't matter you shift with the old finger or you shift with the new finger. It's the same sensation. The hand becomes inert and you slide. So when I discovered that actually a very good illustration for me is those Weinberg sonatas, which I recorded actually in 2010. There were a lot of technical difficulties why it's coming out only now. But I'm playing it at Indiana in a few weeks, and so now I'm relearning some of them. And things that I remember being very difficult all of a sudden are easy. Because in those 7 years, I've changed how I feel my left hand. So, just a few minutes. So let me quickly go into my concepts of phrasing without tension. So what I find the most important is learning to control time. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. I think time is really our worst enemy. Trying to do things in time is what makes us tense. Reaching for the next note in time. And so and that's a concept that was kind of brewing in my head for a long time, even when I was a student, because I realized when I listened to the old masters, what I was mostly fascinated by is how you would feel that they were in complete control of time. They could stop on any note, make any note longer, and it would sound completely logical and completely in control. And so what I realized, and again, teaching that neuroscience course also solidified it for me, because there are two ways that we perceive time. One is automatic circuit, automatic timekeeping, beat keeping, and the other one is conscious. And unfortunately, most of us go with automatic one. And that automatic beat keeping is what creates tension. So I'm sure you've noticed when you practice slowly with a metronome, if you listen to the metronome and you try to be with it, you are never in rhythm. You're constantly either chasing or slowing yourself down, it never feels comfortable. If you use the metronome to synchronize your internal rhythm with it, then when you start playing, if you play correctly, you actually stop hearing the metronome, because it's completely in sync with your internal beat. I notice it all the time. Like if I don't hear the metronome, then I know I'm really solid. And so, for me, most important thing in learning to phrase properly is erasing that automatic beat keeping and playing every note at a certain time because you decide to do it, not because it's externally imposed rhythm. And so the way I practice it, and it kind of feeds into the other concept for me, is that music basically consists of harmony and rhythm. Like those are the two basic tools that composers use. Harmony creates a different expression, right? Harmony changes emotion. Every note changes the harmony slightly, so it changes the emotional effect. And the rhythm is a gesture. Any combination of rhythmic patterns is a gesture. It's like pantomime, except we do it, with music rather than our hands. So what I do first is you take the rhythm out. You take time out of the equation. So you take separate notes and you make them sound the way you would find the colors that you would want in the actual phrase, but it's like Lego blocks. You just take them apart. So if you practice Schumann sonata, you go. You just imagine the color. And if that's still difficult, if you still feel like you want to go forward, you play every note 3 times. You just go. Until that desire to connect notes is gone completely. And you can just enjoy every sound. You hear the sound in your head, the color, and then you find it with your hands. And then when you can do that consistently, then you take a very slow tempo and you start putting it back together. And watching, I usually always do it with a metronome, not to keep rhythm, because I find metronome is, I call it the great objector. The moment the metronome is on, you start hearing things more objectively. And so I usually put it on subdivisions. So let's say if I was practicing Schumann sonata, I would put it on triplets, bum, 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 about half tempo, and go. Because it gives me time also think about staying relaxed. The reason I bring Schumann sonata as an example is because this music is so prone to making us feel all tense because it's so, so boiling, right? And I know I've played the sonata for many, many years, but every time I have to play it, I still start practicing the metronome because otherwise I feel immediately, I feel this coming on. But after I work through, then I can go. And so it's really learning to control timing. Basically, what happens is that we all have the recording playing in our head, and I don't mean the specific recording, but the music. And then our body tries to chase after that recording. And so for me, the control really comes in turning off that recording and creating every note deliberately on the spot, rather than following a pre-programmed sequence. So just like with the rhythm, it also the same thing goes for phrasing. That phrasing becomes free and under control when you stop following the recording in your head. Yeah. There are a couple of minutes left, so I thought I can maybe stop there and take any questions. Yes? Staccato. It's basically sped up stop bows. Spiccato, okay. I take a penny. With a rubber band, I put it on the tip of the bow, so you feel the weight of the tip, and then you go. So first you learn just to drop the bow. So it's all, for me, spiccato is all about feeling the weight of the tip. And then I take the penny off and tell them that they got it back with interest. And then, of course, there are variations. There are more vertical spiccato. There is more kind of orchestral. But it's all, once you learn how the bow feels naturally, how the bow jumps naturally, then it's very easy to adjust. Yes.
We heard
for a long time this concept of tirer and pousser, the idea of pull. In watching you play, it almost looks, you can tell me if you're really doing it, if it's a deliberate thing or not, but it almost looks like you're thinking of wrapping the string, the bow on here on one side of the string and then rolling
In a way,
to the other
yes,
side.
absolutely, absolutely. I really believe in that, and it's not necessarily connected to up or down bow.
No.
I just find that to create three-dimensional sound, you have to play in 3 dimensions.
I mean, it looks like it would get the string to vibrate
Right,
more.
right.
More
And again, if you watch cellists, they never play on the same plane. They always vary. Especially on the G string. So if you go just that way, or if you go, the sound just blooms.
And just one other thing related to getting the best sound, because the strings are at different levels on the bridge, and because you're not using a shoulder rest,
Right.
you feel that gives you more freedom to talk.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And maybe in a very fast passage, it might not be practical to move
Of
around
course,
quickly.
of
but,
course,
but for the
But
legato
you know,
cantato,
actually, even in the fast passage, if you go, you
Could
can
do
always
that.
rotate a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. Again, cellists rotate cello. Are we any worse? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.